Hello, my name is Jessica Funderman, and this is my Module 14 case study. In this case, the St. Regis School needs extra funding often, and so they do school fundraisers as well as a PTA-sponsored fundraiser. This fundraising has typically been used to purchase computers and software for the computer lab, which holds 20 computers. Mrs. Lynn, the media specialist, has primarily been in charge of this computer lab space. Issue: teachers wanted to access the software in their classrooms on their single student computers. So they asked Mrs. Lynn to make copies of the software so they could use it on those computers. Mrs. Lynn made the copies and then distributed them, but Mrs. Lynn, one of the third grade teachers, did not feel comfortable using it and reported this to the principal. So in the initial conversation between the principal and Mrs. Lynn, the principal address the issues of copyright law and possible consequences due to Mrs. Lynn copying the software. Principal asked Mrs. Lynn to stop making the copies and to collect all that she had already made. Mrs. Lynn believes that being in a rural area, this is not a huge deal and that she will not get in trouble because no one will likely hear about the situation. So, legal issue here is the copyright. Copywriting prohibits the copying of original works, which does include software. Schools can often have a little bit more flexibility with copyright laws, and this would be described under fair use. But fair use is not applicable here because, one, the creator is losing out on a big amount of profit. Copying is being done without notice, and then excessive copying is being done. Mrs. Lynn was made aware of this law and doesn't seem concerned by it, which becomes an ethical issue as well. So in summary, the issue: Mrs. Lynn's copyright violation does not appear to concern her, and as principal, Mr. Sample must ensure that this does not continue within his school or consequences could apply to those involved. So the facts of the case. The people involved: Mrs. Lynn, she's the media specialist. She copied software with help of PTA president per request of teachers. Third grade teacher Mrs. Brandon would not accept the copied materials and reported this to the principal. Mrs. Lynn does not seem concerned. It is unknown what the school's policy is about copyright issues and teacher consequences. The place. This is taking place at St. Regis School, which is a K-8 small and rural school district. There's about 2 teachers per grade and 420 students. Software copies were made in the school library. Software copies were then distributed in school classrooms for teacher use. It is unknown the demographics and socioeconomic makeup of students and their families in this school district. We do know that software copies were made to help support the third grade curriculum, but we don't know the specific software products that were copied or the amount of software that was copied for use. And we also do not know if this is a public or private school. In review, the key things to be concerned about here: the school district and or the teachers, including Mrs. Lynn, could be liable for copyright infringement. Collaboration with stakeholders, community members, could become tarnished. The PTA has supported the school with funding for computers and software, so we don't want to ruin that relationship. Third, software needs of teachers should be better understood so teachers can be supported in providing the best education for students. And fourth, consulting with software companies could prove to be beneficial, so that way the school can maybe access a school license and allow for a broader use of the software in a legal way. So there's a couple different options moving forward. The first option is to have no action at all. Possible consequences of this is that the school could be reprimanded and possibly sued. There's the possibility of losing any use of the software altogether, and then job loss for the principal and possibly teachers as well. A second option is to fire Mrs. Lynn. Consequences of this could be a possible lawsuit from Mrs. Lynn. This could ruin relationships with other employees because it would make the principal seem kind of unreasonable, and then possibly struggle to rehire someone willing to take on all of the responsibilities of Mrs. Lin. The third option is to firmly require all software copying ends and confiscate the copies. This could possibly ruin the relationship with Mrs. Lin. Looking at these options a little bit more, pros of no action at all: it's no extra work for the principal, and teachers continue to utilize the software in their classrooms. Some cons are that it is risky and there's a possible lawsuit there, and then Mrs. Brandon would feel unsupported. Firing Mrs. Lin avoids a lawsuit towards the school and puts a definite end towards copyright issues, and it also helps set the tone for other staff in this situation. Cons: losing Mrs. Lin and rehiring a media specialist. The third option, firmly require all software copying ends and confiscating the copies, would avoid any potential lawsuit or copyright issues because it was put to an end. Cons, though: teachers can't use the software on individual computers in their classroom, and this could potentially damage relationships with employees. I would choose that third option, to firmly require all software copying ends and confiscate the made copies. I would start off by communicating with Mrs. Lin, the teachers who'd received copies, and all staff to ensure the problem is resolved. And this connects to part of that standard about communicating laws, policies, and regulations to promote success and well-being. I would also work to establish school policy regarding internet and computer use, specifying copyright laws and fair use policy. This is another part of that standard about implementation of the laws and rights and policies. I would provide possible consequences if teachers or students fail to follow this policy, and then also communicate the policy to staff and provide training on it. In order to better understand the software needs of the school, I would communicate well with everyone and then hopefully be able to provide adequate copies of the software in a legal way. In order to implement this plan, I would continue the conversation with Mrs. Lin. I would ensure that she will not make any more copies of the software, definitely collect all the copies that have been already distributed, and by putting a stop to the copyright infringement, we will ideally avoid any larger issues because we've stopped it early on. As long as I can guarantee Mrs. Lin's cooperation, I believe I can handle this situation on my own at this very early stage. Next, I would have a conversation with the PTA president because she was involved with making some of the copies. I would just have a friendly conversation about copyright laws, what fair use is, and why this situation does not apply to that. So that way we are on the same page about what is and is not acceptable. I would work to maintain this relationship and reinforce how thankful the school is for the community's support in providing technology resources. Next, I would work to research and better understand copyright laws, policies, and procedures of implementation in other school districts. I would use that information to develop school policies for our own school based on research and include guidelines for proper use, define fair use requirements, include improper use definitions, and also consequences of that improper use. Although I feel that I can handle the situation myself, I would need the superintendent's involvement as well as the school board members to approve the new policies put in place. I would also want to provide training for teachers on proper use of copyrighted materials as well as safe internet use. I'd work to develop training to the teachers, and then they can provide education to our students. If this plan is not successful and my staff does not comply, I will need to consult my superintendent and possibly a school lawyer to help resolve this issue. Ideally, with all of these plans in place and catching this early on and addressing the issue, working to better develop the policy along the way, I can avoid any future issues and consequences to this while keeping a friendly, open mind during the conversations and trying to accommodate everyone's needs. Thanks for watching.